Good evening from Mission Control Houston and the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center as we begin our all-night coverage of the homecoming of NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei and his two Russian crewmates. Vande Hei culminating almost a year in space and the completion of a U.S. record-setting flight on the International Space Station. At this hour, Vande Hei and Russian cosmonauts Anton Shkaplerov and Pyotr Dubrov of Roscosmos are preparing to say farewell to the rest of the Expedition 66 crew and climb into their Soyuz MS-19 spacecraft that is docked to the Roscosmos module on the Earth-facing port of the Russian segment of the station. They will close the hatch to the Soyuz shortly and prepare for their undocking from the station early Wednesday at 2:21 a.m. Central Time, 3:21 a.m. Eastern Time, bound for a deorbit and entry back into the Earth's atmosphere, followed by a parachute-assisted landing on the steppe of south-central Kazakhstan, southeast of the remote town of Zhezkazgan. Landing is set for Wednesday morning at 6:28 a.m. Central Time, 7:28 a.m. Eastern Time, 5:28 p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan, about 2 hours and 20 minutes before sunset. We'll talk more about the undocking and landing operations in a moment. Vande Hei and Dubrov are completing a 355-day mission in space and aboard the ISS, a mission that will have spanned 5,680 orbits of the Earth and 150.6 million miles since their launch last April, a voyage equivalent to some 312 round trips to the moon. Anton Shkaplerov, the Soyuz commander for today's return to Earth, who handed over command of the station earlier today to NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn, is wrapping up 176 days in space and aboard the ISS on this his fourth mission to the station. Shkaplerov will have traveled 2,816 orbits of the Earth on a journey of more than 74 million miles when he lands some 8 hours from now. Vande Hei's mission that evolved into a 355-day sojourn, a record for a single spaceflight by a U.S. astronaut, puts him third on the all-time endurance list for American space travelers at 523 days on his two flights, just behind former astronaut Peggy Whitson and astronaut Jeff Williams. Tonight's operation for undocking and landing being controlled half a world away at the Russian Mission Control Center on the outskirts of Moscow in the town of Korolyov, where Russian flight controllers are standing by talking to the crew that shortly will be entering the Soyuz spacecraft and closing the hatch to begin pre-undocking preparations. About an hour ago, the Soyuz was placed on autonomous power, the first step on the road home for Shkaplerov, Dubrov, and Vande Hei.
9 is complete. It's ODF page 24. Copy, Anton. Just a reminder for you that the
year-long journey for Vande Hei and Dubrov began on April 9th, 2021, from launch site 31 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan with the launch of the Soyuz MS-18 spacecraft. Vande Hei and Dubrov launched to the station on a short two-orbit rendezvous along with Russian cosmonaut Oleg Novitsky, who returned home last October. Shkaplerov launched back in October on the Soyuz MS-19 with two spaceflight participants who came home with Novitsky, Shkaplerov remaining on board. And of course, tonight, he'll return home with Vande Hei and Dubrov on the Soyuz MS-19 following its undocking a few hours from now from the Roscosmos module.
And the closure itself should be performed at 7 hours, 10 minutes.
This is a view inside the Roscosmos module that is docked to the Earth-facing port of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. Soon, the members of the Expedition 66 crew, who will remain on board under the command of Tom Marshburn. The Expedition 67 increment will begin at the moment of undocking at 2:21 a.m. Central Time, 3:21 a.m. Eastern Time, when the Soyuz MS-19 will depart the International Space Station and will back away for a special photography and videography session that Dubrov will be conducting from the uppermost section of the Soyuz spacecraft, the orbital module, the top section of the three-section Soyuz spacecraft. The Soyuz will back away to a distance first of about 70 meters away from the International Space Station. Anton Shkaplerov in the center seat of the Soyuz and the descent module, flanked to his left by Dubrov and to his right by Vande Hei, will then manually maneuver the Soyuz vehicle to position some 230 meters away from the International Space Station, where Dubrov will conduct photography and videography of the Naoka multipurpose laboratory module and the recently arrived Prishal node module, to which the Soyuz 21 spacecraft is located. That spacecraft with Oleg Artemyev and Russian cosmonauts Denis Matveyev and Sergei Korsakov arrived at the International Space Station almost 12 days ago to begin their 6 months aboard the International Space Station. Once that photography is complete, after about 30 minutes of videography and photography, the Soyuz will execute a separation maneuver to begin to phase away from the International Space Station for the deorbit burn that will follow at 5:34 a.m. Central Time, 6:34 a.m. Eastern Time. You see Anton Shkaplerov moving from the Soyuz back into the Rosviet module. The crew, you're looking at Pyotr Dubrov there just inside the hatchway to the Soyuz vehicle. They are stowing last-minute items before they say farewell to their Expedition 66 counterparts and begin the process of closing the hatch, followed by pre-undocking preparations. And there is Dubrov making his way back inside the International Space Station for the final few minutes that he, Shkaplerov, and Vande Hei will spend inside the International Space Station before they close the hatch for good to the Soyuz MS-19. Last week, I had the opportunity to talk for a few minutes with Mark Vande Hei on board the International Space Station to get his thoughts about his final days on board the complex and what he has accomplished in almost a year on board the International Outpost. Let's take a look at some of what Vande Hei offered as he spends his final days and moments on board the International Space Station. Tell us a little bit about the rigors of a long-duration spaceflight, the mental challenges of taking things one step at a time, one day at a time, weekend after weekend, when things are a little slower than they may be during the course of a week.
Well, you've certainly got to have good habits. You've got to practice a lot of positive self-talk. You've got to remain connected to the people that have such significant relationships in your life back on the ground. You've got to, of course, maintain the friendships with the people that you have on Earth. We're all very social creatures, and that certainly enhances our quality of life tremendously. I had to spend a lot of time, tried to make a habit of every day meditating. That certainly helped out a lot with keeping myself in a kind of a good, grounded frame of mind. And like I mentioned earlier, really the important thing was recognizing that I had to stay focused on what I was doing at the moment. And also, one more thing, trying to look for things to be grateful for as opposed to things to gripe about. That goes a long way with making whatever you're doing more palatable.
What were some of the high points and some of the low points of spending a year away from the home planet?
My favorite moments, the highest points for me, were the times when I was just hanging around, usually around a mealtime with my crewmates, and laughing so hard we were in tears about some comment somebody made, or just all of us contributing to a sense of humor and enjoying each other's company. Low points, physically, this is a challenging environment to be in. I've had a lot of congestion and headaches. When there's times when you just feel very physically uncomfortable, those are probably the low points. It colors everything you're doing, and it takes a lot more work to stay in the right frame of mind in those situations.
You know, we're often asked, with 7 or more people on board the International Space Station at any given time, it's hard to believe that you'd be lonely, but were there moments of solitude or loneliness that you had to work your way through during the past year?
Actually, I don't think so. When you put in perspective how many challenges people have had because of COVID and all the periods of time when we've been isolated in our homes with very few people, in a way, I've been fortunate. All of my needs have been met, including a lot of social needs with usually at least 7 people on board, some people to live and work with every day, and they're wonderful people. So that was certainly a highlight for me. So compared to what we've had to deal with on the ground, I certainly haven't felt like it's been a tougher situation as far as dealing with loneliness. And our Behavior, Health, and Performance group does a fantastic job of helping us stay connected with our loved ones on the ground, and even being able to talk to new people that I wouldn't normally have gotten the opportunity to talk to.
Mark Vande Hei, in a brief interview I did with him last week. We'll hear more from Vande Hei as the evening goes along with our subsequent broadcasts. Meanwhile, landing preparations well underway in Kazakhstan. In the town of Karaganda, the staging city for tonight's landing operations, a NASA contingent of support personnel led by ISS program manager Joel Montalbano. They're en route to the Karaganda airport, where they will board an Antonov 26 aircraft with search and recovery personnel from Rosaviatsia, the Russian search and recovery team. Within which the NASA team is embedded. They'll be flying on an Antonov 26 aircraft for a brief flight to the southwest to the town of Zhezkazgan, where Russian Mi-8 helicopters are standing by to take the landing team support personnel on a 35-minute helicopter ride down to the landing site to recover the crew. There are 8 helicopters in play for tonight's landing. 6 of those Mi-8 helicopters will be at the prime landing site to the southeast of Zhezkazgan. 2 other helicopters will be positioned at the ballistic landing site to the southwest near Baikonur, the launch site, in the unlikely event that the Soyuz would land short of its intended target, which is the prime landing site, of course, to the southeast of Zhezkazgan. The landing team members will be boarding those helicopters at the Zhezkazgan airport a few hours from now. Rotors will be spinning, and they'll be taking off in sequential fashion for the short ride down to the landing site, where they will form a racetrack pattern around the landing site, waiting for the arrival of the Soyuz MS-19 spacecraft. And once it touches down, they'll land in sequential fashion, erect an inflatable medical tent near the spacecraft, and begin to extract the crew pretty quickly, one after the other. They'll be put, the crew will be put in chairs right outside of the spacecraft before they're carried into a nearby inflatable medical tent to get out of their Sokol launch and entry suits into more comfortable clothing. They will board those Russian helicopters to fly about 2 hours back to the staging city of Karaganda, where the crew will split up, with Vande Hei boarding a NASA jet for the flight back to Houston. The 2 cosmonauts will be boarding a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft for a flight back to their training base in Star City outside of Moscow. Once again, there's the scene inside the Rosviet module, the tunnel and the short passageway that leads to the open hatch to the Soyuz MS-19. About 15 minutes from now, we're expecting the crew to gather in that passageway for final farewells with their Expedition 66 counterparts before they make their way inside the Soyuz vehicle, close the hatch, and begin to depressurize the small tunnel. and conduct other pre-undocking preparations that will lead to an undocking command at 2:19 a.m. Central Time. That will open up the hooks holding the Soyuz to the Rassvet module. That will take about 90 seconds to complete. Physical separation as the springs on either side of the docking interface push off against one another. Scheduled for 2:21 a.m. Central Time, 3:21 a.m. Eastern Time. After the Soyuz hatch is closed, which is expected a short time from now, the crew on board the Soyuz, Shkaplerov, the Soyuz commander, Vande Hei, and Pyotr Dubrov, will discuss other activities with Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center before they begin the process of suiting up in their Sokol launch and entry suits and conducting leak checks to ensure that their suits have good integrity before other preparations are undertaken. And a good view there of Mark Vande Hei, who's wrapping up 355 days in space, the longest single space flight in U.S. spaceflight history. Although it is currently snowing in Karaganda, the forecast for landing to the southwest in Zhezkazgan calls for scattered clouds, mostly clear skies, and temperatures about 45 degrees Fahrenheit to greet the 3 returning crew members. The landing again is on tap for 6:28 a.m. Central Time, 7:28 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 5:28 p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan, some 2 hours and 20 minutes before sunset. And Pyotr Dubrov now in the field of view. Once again, Vande Hei and Dubrov launched on April 9th, 2021 on the Soyuz MS-18 spacecraft along with Oleg Novitsky. Novitsky returned home last October. Dubrov and Vande Hei remained on board, joined by Anton Shkaplerov, who will be the Soyuz commander for tonight's landing. Shkaplerov will be in the center seat of the Soyuz with the call sign of Astra. You'll hear Russian flight controllers reporting as they're calling and talking to the crew during pre-landing and entry activities. Shkaplerov will be flanked to his left by Dubrov, who will be board engineer number 1 tonight. Mark Vande Hei on the right is board engineer number 2. Shkaplerov in the field of view at the hatchway. He is wrapping up 176 days in space and aboard the International Space Station. At the time of landing, he will have totaled 708 days in space on his 4 flights, putting him 7th on the all-time endurance list.
Just a reminder for the transition to independent power time, it is 6:50.
Down at the landing site, in addition to the half-dozen Russian Mi-8 helicopters that will be flying from Zhezkazgan to the landing site to recover the crew, the landing is being supported by a series of all-terrain vehicles and the Antonov 26 that is transporting the search and recovery forces, and the NASA support team from Karaganda to Zhezkazgan will be flying in a racetrack pattern around the landing site to provide a command and control relay capability from the Soyuz spacecraft to the Russian flight controllers outside of Moscow. You saw Matthias Maurer, the European Space Agency astronaut, in the field of view there. He and the rest of the Expedition 66 crew that will become Expedition 67 at the time of undocking a few hours from now. They remain on board under the command of NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn.
I am sending B2 command. Now it is B6 command. B8 or B8 command is being sent. And D or D2 command. Moscow Astray 1, so 4 commands have been sent as per the step 2.3.1. Copy. Now you can proceed to step 23.2, the preparation for the hatch cover closure, BOSU and OBSU. Copy. In work. So, Moscow, I'm disconnecting the com cap right now. Sounds good.
During the course of 355 days in space for Vande Hei and Dubrov, they saw the arrival of 15 visiting vehicles or modules and the departure of 14 visiting vehicles. Pyotr Dubrov conducted 4 spacewalks during his time aboard the International Space Station in his first flight. Vande Hei, as we mentioned earlier, completing his 2nd mission into space, and what he has said, admittedly, his last space flight, and he'll come in 3rd on the all-time U.S. spaceflight endurance list with 523 days in space on his 2 missions to the International Space Station. 3rd in the all-time list behind Peggy Whitson and Jeff Williams. And in the field of view now is Russian cosmonaut Oleg Artemyev, who arrived on the Soyuz MS-21 spacecraft almost 12 days ago, along with Denis Matveyev and Sergei Korsakov. Other members of the Expedition 66 crew, soon to become Expedition 67, gathering in the passageway of the Rassvet module. At the time of undocking, as mentioned earlier, Expedition 67 formally begins under the command of NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn, joined by other NASA astronauts Raja Chari and Caleb Barron, and European Space Agency astronaut Matthias Maurer. Denis Matveyev now in the foreground. Once again, after the undocking at 2:21 a.m. Central Time, 3:21 a.m. Eastern Time, Shkaplerov will conduct a separation burn of about 13 seconds to move the Soyuz to a distance of about 70 meters away from the International Space Station, at which point Pyotr Dubrov will make his way from the descent module to the upper section of the Soyuz, called the orbital module, armed with cameras, both digital still cameras and a video camera, to conduct photography of the Russian segment of the station, first at 70 meters and then at about 230 meters. This will be manually flown by Shkaplerov to provide photo documentation at a distance ultimately of about 230 meters away from the station. It'll take about 30 minutes to complete this photographic exercise before Shkaplerov conducts a final separation burn of about 17 seconds in duration to begin phasing away from the International Space Station for good. The Soyuz will wind up at a point well away from the station for the start of the deorbit burn Wednesday morning at 5:34 a.m. Central Time, 6:34 a.m. Eastern Time. That will be a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde braking maneuver to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit to begin its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. Some 28 minutes after the deorbit burn, the automatic computers on board the Soyuz will trigger a separation of the three sections, a pyrotechnic separation of the three sections of the Soyuz, enabling the descent module, where the crew will be located in their Sokol launch and entry suits, with the heat shield at the bottom of the Soyuz facing the direction of travel for the entry back into the Earth's atmosphere, and for Vande Hei and Dubrov, the first tug of Earth's gravity in almost a year. Temperatures around the Soyuz will build to some 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, with a plasma atmosphere that will envelop the Soyuz as it descends through the atmosphere. Exit from the plasma regime will take place at about 6:11 a.m. Central Time, with G-loads, the maximum G-loads for the crew of about 3 to 4 Gs, before the command is issued to open up the parachutes on the Soyuz. First a drogue chute that will then pull out the main parachute, with landing scheduled at 6:28 and 36 seconds a.m. Central Time, 7:28 and 36 seconds a.m. Eastern Time, about 90 miles to the southeast of the town of Zhezkazgan.
РСМКС, ЦУПа Москвы, ВСГ-1.
ISS MCC Moscow on space to ground 1.
At this hour, the International Space Station is flying some 260 statute miles above Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, moving from northwest to southeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. All station systems operating normally, and again, a view inside the Roscosmos module to the hatchway to the Soyuz MS-19 spacecraft, to which it has been linked since last April 9th, following its launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan.
ISS MCC Moscow on space to ground 1.
РСМКС, ЦУПа Москвы, ВСГ-1.
ISS MCC Moscow on space to ground 1.
РСМКС, ЦУПа Москвы, ВСГ-1.
Station Moscow, space to ground 1.
We are expecting the crew members to appear very shortly for an opportunity to say farewell to one another before Shkaplerov, Vande Hei, and Dubrov move in through that hatchway to the Soyuz MS-19 vehicle, where they will close the hatch, conduct leak checks at the docking interface between the Soyuz and the International Space Station to make sure that it is ready to be depressurized. The small vestibule or passageway will be depressurized down to vacuum, setting the stage for the command in a few hours to open up the hooks holding the Soyuz to the Roscosmos module. Springs on both sides of the docking interface will push off against one another, and the Soyuz MS-19 will be free to back away and begin the journey home. Anton Shkaplerov, the Soyuz commander. Pyotr Dubrov on his left. And in the background is Oleg Artemiev.
Прекрасно выглядите.
We can see you. You're looking great.
There's Sergei Korsakov on the right.
Can you see us?
Видно прекрасно, все.
We can see you very well.
Молодцы.
NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei wrapping up 355 days in space.
Very well. And close the hatches. It's time.
Марка не полностью видно. Пусть он поближе к Пете
Mark?
подвинется.
Can you please get closer to Pyotr so you can be seen better?
Отлично, Олег.
Excellent, Alex.
European Space Agency astronaut Matthias Mohr saying farewell. Shkaplerov handed over command of the International Space Station on Tuesday morning to NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn. There is Kayla Barron saying farewell to her crewmates. She, Marshburn, Rajachari, and Mohr will remain on board the station until late April when they return home in the SpaceX Crew Dragon.
Олег, Игнатов.
Alex, this is Ignat.
Спроси, пожалуйста, подготовку к закрытию крыши выполнили?
Are you ready with the hatch cover closure prep?
Спросил, сейчас ответит. 23.2 выполнено.
It was done at
Все, принял. Ага, спасибо.
23:02. 23.3 per 23.3.
Vande Hei is saying farewell to Tom Marshburn, the new commander of the station. Again, Expedition 66 will become Expedition 67 at the time of undocking. Pyotr Dubrov has made his way inside the MS-19. Artemiev saying farewell to Mark Vande Hei.
Сейчас, минуточку, небольшая заминочка.
Stand by, please.
Пустить. Победу.
Как видим.
We just wanted to have a small bite. Yes, we can see.
That is Denis Matveyev in the foreground. He and Artemyev will be conducting a number of spacewalks in the months ahead to continue outfitting the Naoka multipurpose laboratory module and the European robotic arm that is part of the Naoka module. Anton Shkaplerov, the Soyuz commander, now making his way through the hatch. And Vande Hei now leaving the space station, making his way inside the Soyuz. The three departing crew members now inside the Soyuz MS-19, preparing for hatch closure.
Олег, я смотрю, с заминкой справились. Есть добро на закрытие люков.
Alex, I can tell that you are done with whatever you wanted to do, ready for hatch closure.
The Rosviet hatch is closed.
Temperature is less than 15 degrees, and it's jumping constantly. It's fluctuating. Anton, we copy.
Так, 4:15, люк закрыт.
Принял, Олег, спасибо.
As soon as the Soyuz hatch is closed, Shkaplerov will begin a series of leak checks across the docking interface between Soyuz and Rosviet before the departing crew begins to don their Sokol launch and entry suits.
Moscow, Astray. Go ahead. BOSU hatch is closed, and we're on page 237. Copy, and we have reported it. Copy. You are on page 237. Please provide a running commentary of everything you do. Copy. Will do.
And Anton Shkaplerov now reporting that the hatch on the Soyuz MS-19 is closed at 11:16 p.m. Central Time, 12:16 a.m. Eastern Time. So the hatches are now closed with the departing crew aboard the Soyuz. They'll begin a series of vestibule leak checks for the small passageway at the docking interface between the Soyuz and the International Space Station before beginning to don their Sokol launch and entry suits.
SSVP is on hooks closed, and I'm sending the S-17 command. S-15 correction. Right, I understand. Backup. Internal docking and transfer system command has been sent. D8 is no longer illuminated. And now I'm sending the Delta 7 command. SSVP power is on, and we're monitoring S11, Sierra 11. S11 is illuminated. The transfer hatch is closed. That's wonderful. Copy. S11 is illuminated. We are sending the Delta 8 command to turn off the docking and internal transfer system, SSVP. SSVP is off. Okay, pressing on. S11 is no longer illuminated. I am sending S16 command then for the deactivation of the backup internal.
With the hatches closed between the Rosviet module and the Soyuz MS-19 spacecraft here in Mission Control at Houston, the Orbit 1 team of flight controllers now on console, having completed a handover from the previous team. They will be on console throughout the course of the overnight hours, looking over the crew's shoulders and monitoring activities as we prepare for the return to Earth of Mark Vande Hei, Pyotr Dubrov, and Anton Shkaplerov. Leading the Orbit 1 team is Rick Henfling, the flight director. To his right, veteran astronaut Tracy Caldwell Dyson, who will be on talking to the space station crew throughout the course of the overnight hours when required. To recap, the departing crew now aboard the Soyuz MS-19. The hatch closed to the Soyuz vehicle about 4 minutes ago at 11:16 p.m. Central Time. The departing crew now will conduct a series of leak checks across the docking interface before they begin to suit up in their Sokol launch and entry suits and conduct other pre-undocking preparations that will lead to the undocking of the Soyuz from the Rosviet module at 2:21 a.m. Central Time, 3:21 a.m. Eastern Time. The Soyuz, under the command of Anton Shkaplerov, will back away from the Rosviet module and will, under the manual control of Shkaplerov, translate to a distance away from the station to allow Dubrov to climb into the upper section of the orbital module of the Soyuz to begin about 30 minutes of photographic documentation with a digital still camera and a video camera of the Naoka multipurpose laboratory module and the Prishal node module, to which the Soyuz MS-21 spacecraft is docked. After that, the Soyuz will depart the station for the final time, move to a safe distance away from the International Space Station for the deorbit burn, at 5:34 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday morning, 6:34 a.m. Eastern Time, a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde maneuver, a braking maneuver to allow the Soyuz to drop out of orbit for the start of its entry back into the Earth's atmosphere, and a landing under the parachutes at 6:28 a.m. Central Time, 7:28 a.m. Eastern Time Wednesday morning to bring to an end 355 days in space for Vande Hei and Dubrov and 176 days in space for Anton Shkaplerov. In Kazakhstan, the search and recovery forces, along with an embedded NASA support team, is at the Karaganda Airport, the staging city, for tonight's landing operations. They'll be boarding an Antonov 26 aircraft shortly for a short flight down to Zhezkazgan to the southwest, where Russian Mi-8 helicopters are standing by to take the landing contingent down to the landing site itself for the extraction and recovery of the crew and the start of their return back to their respective homes. Vande Hei boarding a NASA jet on Wednesday morning for the flight back to Houston. The two cosmonauts boarding a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft for a flight back to Star City, their training base on the outskirts of Moscow.
Orbital module on. Copy. Now, we need to raise PPO2 up to 170. All right, copy.
So with the three departing crew members now aboard the Soyuz, hatch closed, leak checks underway, we'll wrap up this first broadcast of the evening and look towards our undocking coverage at 1:45 a.m. Central Time, 2:45 a.m. Eastern Time on NASA television as Vande Hei, Dubrov, and Shkaplerov depart the International Space Station for the beginning of the trip back to Earth. We'll see you in a few hours. For now, this is Mission Control Houston.